The memory of the Aethelred deal is etched into my mind with the clarity of a fever dream. It wasn't merely a contract. It was a 5-month war waged in sterile conference rooms, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the belief in my own technical superiority. I can still recall the specific shade of corporate navy blue the Aethelred CEO wore, a deep, uncompromising hue that matched the gravity of the stakes. I was the only person at Viridian Dynamics who possessed the granular, intuitive understanding of the underlying legacy tech stack, the architecture so convoluted it scared off even our most seasoned developers. It was a language only I spoke, and I used it to close every single gap. The resulting $500,000 revenue line item wasn't a bonus. It was the entire dam holding back a flood of red ink, single-handedly pulling the entire quarter out of a catastrophic financial slump. I was not just a top performer. I was the essential, irreplaceable engine of the company. The moment the news broke on the sales floor, the silence of the afternoon shattered. My team, the analysts and reps I had trained and fiercely protected, erupted in a spontaneous, genuine chant of my name. They lifted me high, the cheap office carpet blurring beneath my feet. In that dizzying, electric triumph, I allowed myself to believe the lie, that sheer merit and competence were all that mattered. I felt the culmination of years of sacrifice, missed anniversaries, canceled vacations, a personal life reduced to an afterthought, was finally, irrevocably validated. I felt a fierce, loyal pride for the company that I believed was finally, justly, about to crown me. The air was thick with the scent of cheap champagne and hard-won victory, a scent I mistook for destiny. The belief was total, and the fall, therefore, would be astronomical. I looked down at the cheering faces, and in their raw belief in me, I found a fleeting, fatal belief in the organization. The celebratory buzz in my veins had barely cooled when Caspian extended his invitation, a casual wave toward the cafe that felt more like a formal summons to the corporate high table. We sat at our usual spot, a miserable, tiny table tucked away from the main rush, where the low hum of the espresso machine perpetually masked true conversation. The air was heavy with a familiar, depressing mix of burnt espresso and the sugary odor of institutional pastries. He didn't waste time on false warmth. His eyes, perpetually cold and calculating, fixed on some point just past my shoulder. The head of sales role is opening up next month, he stated, his voice flat, turning the opportunity into a simple transaction. It's yours to lose, Amelia. We all know you have the numbers, the technical depth, the kind of brutal consistency this company rarely sees. Just be a team player in the coming weeks. Be seen to support the changes we are making. The insidious phrase, yours to lose, settled in my gut, a perverse way of saying, it's already yours, but I could still take it away. Yet, the magnitude of the promise eclipsed the veiled threat. 5 years, a grueling tenure marked by relentless, obsessive work. This single, quiet conversation felt like the end of the long ascent. I visualized the new office, the corner suite, the commanding view of the city, the silent, terrifying power of having the final sign-off. I saw the vast, open future, a feeling of professional destiny finally materializing. It was the recognition I craved, the authority that would ensure no one could ever question my value again. The adrenaline of the moment demanded a loud, emotional reply, but I simply nodded, holding his gaze, the weighty promise of the promotion already a consuming, electric force in my heart. I was so focused on the prize that I failed to fully register the cold, conditional nature of the man who offered it. The subtle pause, the slight twitch in his jaw, should have been a warning. The shift began subtly, a slight change in the corporate weather that soon became a permanent, chilling frost. Seraphina's arrival was an event. She didn't walk into the office. She cascaded, a magnetic force field of bright, effortless enthusiasm and disarming charm that instantly drew every eye. She seemed engineered in a lab to impress, a dazzlingly non-technical distraction. I watched as Caspian, the man whose packed schedule made him unresponsive to my urgent emails for days on end, suddenly had an unending reservoir of free time. He appointed himself her primary mentor, a title he'd never once applied to my own onboarding. His attention was a public, deliberate spectacle, an acid dripping onto the finely tuned machinery of the team. He'd linger by her desk, the conversations invariably dropping into conspiratorial, hushed tones, accompanied by his overly familiar, possessive hand resting on her chair back or his long, calculating glances. The air around them wasn't professional. It was thick with preferential, private investment that had nothing to do with her barely existent sales track record. My internal processing, usually so logical, sputtered. I was the quiet professional, the architect of our success, but I was not blind. I recognized the pattern of ugly, corrosive favoritism forming, a pattern designed to elevate a favorite while simultaneously and visibly sidelining the proven engine. Every whispered comment, every familiar gesture between them, felt like a deliberate, professional insult directed solely at the promise Caspian had made to me. The very foundation of meritocracy I depended upon began to crack beneath the weight of this blatant, unjust power play. The shift from subtle favoritism to open hostility crystallized in the quarterly strategic meeting. This room, usually a sterile environment for data-driven decisions, became the stage for my first public, professional execution. I presented my Q3 sales strategy, a dense, 50-page proposal that meticulously leveraged the success of the Aethelred acquisition and detailed a complex, low-risk path to maximizing next quarter's revenue. It was flawless. Caspian interrupted me on slide 5, his voice carrying a note of rehearsed impatience. He dismissed the entire work with a dismissive wave, calling it overly academic and too dense for modern, rapid market engagement. The room seemed to shrink. Then Seraphina spoke. She proposed a basic, overly optimistic plan drawn up on 2 slides with bright, nonsensical graphics, calling it a refreshingly simple approach for the new quarter. It was pure filler, marketing buzzwords without substance. Caspian, however, immediately seized the moment, praising her for her modern vision and essential clarity. The humiliation was a raw burn. It wasn't the rejection of my idea that was so painful. It was the deliberate, absurd, public elevation of a meaningless alternative. I watched the faces of my senior colleagues, the veterans who knew exactly what my work was worth, flickering with a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and distaste. The silent pact of meritocracy, the unspoken agreement that hard numbers defined worth, dissolved. I saw the ugly truth. Logic and competence had been officially superseded by a clear, ugly, power-driven theater that left me feeling cold and professionally sickened. The announcement meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp on a Tuesday, the fluorescent lights of the conference room unforgivingly bright. I walked in, my suit jacket perfectly tailored, my spine rigidly straight, determined not to show the anxiety that was a low, powerful hum beneath my skin. Despite all the recent slights, despite the obvious favoritism, a core part of me, the part that believed in the absolute authority of the numbers, still believed in the promise. Caspian stood by the projector screen, his posture radiating a calculated, smug self-satisfaction. He launched into the prepared speech, the usual corporate platitudes about synergy and forward momentum, but his eyes, I noticed, were scanning the room, looking for maximum dramatic effect. When he finally reached the slide for the head of sales position, he performed a theatrical pause, letting the silence expand and sharpen. This promotion, he announced, his voice slow and deliberate, recognizes the bedrock of our operational success, the person who single-handedly secured our most critical revenue this year, demonstrating drive, technical consistency, and undeniable, repeatable results. The new head of sales is Amelia. I gasped. The name, my name, exploded in the room, an overwhelming surge of vindication and pure, blinding ecstasy. My chair was already pushed back, a triumphant, vulnerable smile breaking free on my face, relief flooding my entire body. I had won. But before I could fully rise, before the applause could fully build, Caspian's voice, sharp and laced with a sudden, vicious malice, sliced through the rising energy. He gestured to the screen, which instantly flickered to a new slide, a large, dramatic X crossing out my name. That, he sneered, the word delivered with a devastating, cold cruelty that stopped my movement midair, was the recommendation based purely on past performance. However, effective immediately, leadership has decided that modern vision and cultural alignment are more critical than execution. Therefore, your new head of sales is Seraphina. The whiplash was physical. The brief, agonizing minute of victory had been deliberately engineered as the ultimate precursor to the ultimate humiliation. I sank back into my chair, the culmination of 5 years of life and work vaporized by a single, malicious twist of phrase. The betrayal wasn't the loss of the job, it was the weaponization of my deepest desire against me. The ensuing silence was not respectful, it was a vacuum of shared professional embarrassment. The sting of Caspian using my victory as a setup for his cruel punchline was a profound, nauseating shock. I could not simply sit there and allow the lie to stand as the final word. My breath ragged, my jaw clenched, I rose from my seat a second time, my chair scraping across the floor with a sound that felt deafeningly defiant. On what verifiable basis was that decision made? I demanded, my voice tight and controlled, cutting through the stunned quiet. It was the only question that mattered. Caspian, momentarily thrown by my refusal to be instantly crushed, recovered quickly. His face hardened into a mask of corporate cruelty, the cold, practiced expression of a man dismissing a faulty product. I believe I was clear, Amelia. Leadership requires a modern vision, cultural fit, and the ability to inspire, not just grinding out numbers or obsessive technical deep dives. We need a fresh perspective to lead, and you clearly lack the social refinement required for the role. The dismissal was total, a calculated public execution designed not just to deny me the promotion but to shatter my credibility and silence any possibility of dissent. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of my former colleagues. Some offered fleeting looks of pity, most simply avoided my gaze, finding sudden, intense focus in their spreadsheets. In that moment of complete public isolation, the final, cold truth sank in. The loyalty I had poured into this company was a meaningless, one-way commodity. The organization was not a structure of logic, it was a theater of cruelty, and I was the broken prop. I did not retreat to cry that night. Crying was a luxury afforded to the defeated, and I was done being a victim. The raw, excruciating whiplash of the morning had burned away every vestige of my emotional attachment. I stood in the dead quiet of my apartment, staring at the tacky Viridian Dynamics loyalty mug, a cheap piece of ceramic they gave for 3 years of your life, a hollow reward for countless hours. It represented every meaningless promise, every late-night pizza eaten alone at my desk while Caspian was at dinner with his family. I grabbed my long utility lighter and held the flame, steady and relentless, to the cheap plastic logo. The synthetic smell was immediate and acrid, toxic and fittingly symbolic of the corporate environment I was finally discarding. I let the smoke coil and fill the air for a long moment, watching the plastic melt and hiss. The sight burned away the last remnants of my loyalty and the grief for the future that I had lost. In its place settled a chilling, clear-eyed certainty, a professional rigor devoid of all human warmth. I was no longer an employee seeking justice. I was an observer, an analyst who had just identified a catastrophic systemic failure. This company, and particularly Caspian, was no longer my home. It was a carefully chosen target to be dismantled piece by piece. My plan was not emotional. It was a flaw-proof, surgical strike, an architectural blueprint for total, irreversible professional destruction. The silence was now the sound of preparation. I walked into the office the next morning, but the Amelia they thought they had successfully broken was gone. The new me was a phantom, moving through the glass and steel canyons with a terrifying, quiet grace. My attire was flawless, a perfectly tailored, unreadable suit, and my expression was a study in practiced, professional neutrality. I approached Seraphina's new office, the spacious, commanding corner suite that was my rightful destination. and offered her my hand across the gleaming mahogany desk. Congratulations, Seraphina. I'm here to offer my full support. Tell me what you need during the handover, and I'll ensure a seamless transition. I lied, the words tasting like ash and iron on my tongue. I made sure to hold the handshake 1 second longer than necessary, projecting the image of a defeated, yet compliant, former rival. Caspian observed the entire exchange from his doorway, his chest puffed out in a nauseating display of managerial triumph. He saw a humbled worker, a sore loser who had accepted her fate and was now bending the knee to his favorite. He believed he had successfully crushed and tamed the one employee who truly threatened his position. He had absolutely no idea that beneath the mask of flawless professionalism, I was already cataloging the network access points, the vulnerable infrastructure, and the layout of the professional battlefield he had just handed me. I was the ghost in their machine, invisible, silent, and preparing for the final, catastrophic system shutdown. The act of offering my full support was the final, critical piece of the elaborate disguise. My first and most critical action was the establishment of the Ledger of Incompetence. This was not merely a list. It was a private, encrypted digital document, meticulously structured with the precision of a forensic accounting report, stored on a portable, non-network drive. My purpose was to catalog every single error Seraphina made, from the trivial, a misplaced decimal point on a projection, to the deeply consequential, a late submission to the legal team. I logged the objective facts. Seraphina, missed client call contract renewal, 11 a.m., October 25th. Potential $10,000 recurring revenue loss. I tracked her reliance on outdated pricing information for a major presentation, attaching a timestamp screenshot as irrefutable evidence. Every process she broke, every client complaint she summarily dismissed as whining, was documented with specific dates, times, and hard proof. I was not operating on guesswork or speculation. I was building an irrefutable case, knowing that the smallest, repetitive, systematic failures would, when compiled, create an undeniable picture of gross, unqualified mismanagement. Caspian had elevated her on the basis of vision and social refinement. I would demolish her with my grinding out numbers, the very technical competency he had mocked. My power now lay entirely in the obsessive attention to detail he had so foolishly discarded. My focus narrowed with cold, surgical precision to the company's single most exposed weakness, the Kronos Inc. contract. This was not just a major deal, it was a behemoth, highly complex contract valued at a staggering $2 million, representing the company's only realistic, immediate chance of recovering from their perpetually poor internal performance. I had personally nurtured this client for over 2 years, building a level of deep, personalized trust that transcended the written contract. I knew every executive, every irrational quirk of the decision-makers, and every non-negotiable term that existed only in the subtext of our private conversations. It wasn't just a lucrative target, it was Viridian's lifeblood, the critical artery that, if severed, would guarantee fatal financial consequences. I possessed the entire, intricate, specialized knowledge required to close and maintain this contract. This deep knowledge was my most guarded secret, a $2 million landmine that only I had the code to defuse. The task was simple. During the handover, I needed to ensure that this crucial, life-saving code was lost forever in the confusion and misplaced confidence of my replacement. The execution of the Trojan Horse handover strategy began with flawless, deceptive grace. I approached Seraphina, not as a rival, but as the helpful, gracious former contender who was committed to the success of the team. I spent a detailed hour in her new office, presenting her with the complete, official Kronos files. I walked her through all the major contractual milestones, the strict payment schedule, and the potential pitfalls that were easily solved with standard protocols. I highlighted the obvious, easily absorbed details, the tight deadline, the scale of the deployment, the standard regulatory compliance forms. It was a perfect, extensive misdirection. However, the secret lay in a single, critical, and entirely deliberate omission. The Kronos CEO, a man of bizarre and archaic security concerns, had an absolute, non-contractual insistence on the custom-built Argus data protocol for all their major vendors. This was a bespoke, legacy system requiring highly specific, manual integration that I had personally guaranteed to handle. He viewed any refusal to implement this non-standard system as a profound, personal slight and a mark of poor professional commitment. It was my unique, personalized value add, a detail that existed only in my private notebooks and my head. I left the room, leaving Seraphina drowning in flawless, yet fatally incomplete, documentation. The engine of disaster had been ignited. With the trap set, my next move was to secure an undeniable future. I reached out to a former university colleague, now a trusted executive at Pandora Tech, Viridian's largest and most aggressive competitor. Our meeting was set for an unassuming, low-key restaurant far outside the professional district, a place chosen for its anonymity. I did not engage in the petty drama of my old job. I did not utter a single bad word about Caspian or Seraphina. Instead, I presented my professional record with cold, irrefutable data. The Aethelred deal, the structural inefficiencies I had quietly corrected, and my comprehensive, detailed understanding of key industry clients. I spoke about market dynamics and client relationships with a depth and technical acuity that immediately impressed the Pandora executive. I was interviewing from a position of undeniable strength, not desperation, offering my value as a rare, highly competent asset who had been criminally undervalued and professionally freed. The conversation was not about my escape, it was about their massive strategic gain. My performance review was already complete. All that remained was the final negotiation. I was no longer a player in Viridian's game. I was a high-value free agent choosing my championship team. The call came with astonishing speed, arriving just 3 days after my meeting. Pandora Tech, recognizing the whispers of internal mismanagement at Viridian and acknowledging the proven value of my track record, offered me a generous contract for a director role. It was the immediate professional vindication I needed, the external affirmation that my competence was recognized as currency elsewhere. I accepted the offer with clinical grace, but I immediately engaged in a critical, non-negotiable term. I insisted on a 4-week start date. The Pandora executive, eager to secure me, pushed for 2, but I was firm. I need 4 weeks to ensure a responsible professional transition, I stated, the lie smooth and absolute. The true reason for the timeline was lethal. I needed precisely those 4 weeks for Seraphina to become deeply enough invested in the Kronos negotiations, to be committed and absolutely confident, before the inevitable, catastrophic implosion. The offer itself was my dream. I quit, fantasy realized, a new beginning of power and respect. But the negotiated, non-negotiable start date was the precise timing mechanism for my professional revenge fantasy. The certainty of my future now made the remaining toxic present environment utterly, wonderfully tolerable. I composed my letter of resignation with meticulous, clinical precision, ensuring it was concise and devoid of any emotional language. Submitting it to Caspian was one of the most satisfying acts of my entire career. I slid the paper onto his desk, watching his eyes scan the text. He paused, his eyebrows arching in a performative, theatrical display of faux pity. "A shame you couldn't handle the competition, Amelia," he drawled, his tone dripping with the implication that I was retreating from a difficult fight I had decisively lost. He saw a predictable, sore loser abandoning the field. I met his gaze steadily, offering only a small, enigmatic, almost imperceptible smile. A subtle curve of the lips he completely mistook for meek disappointment and acceptance of my fate. He couldn't possibly know he was looking at the woman who had just negotiated a significant promotion at his direct, bloodthirsty competitor, while simultaneously rigging a catastrophic $2 million financial explosion directly under his office floor. I paused at the doorway, turning back to deliver the final, perfectly calibrated line. I simply said, my voice sweet and low, "I truly wish you and Seraphina all the very best with the Kronos deal," and walked out, leaving the final, poisoned wish hanging in the smug air of his office like a curse. The final act of the handover was performed with the elegance of a surgical procedure. I presented Seraphina with a pristine set of final summary notes, ensuring there were multiple witnesses to my exhaustive diligence. Everything she needed to know about the $2 million contract's high-level structure was perfectly documented. The pricing tiers, the legal review contacts, the delivery schedule, even a minor, easily corrected issue with a late filing. My professionalism was utterly flawless, unimpeachable. However, the critical piece of information, the one detail I had personally maintained as a proprietary value add for the paranoid Kronos CEO, the archaic, unofficial Argus data protocol requirement, was simply, cleanly absent. It was an act of omission, not commission or malice. I had removed the single piece of personal, specialized knowledge that could save the deal, placing all the potential for failure squarely and legally on the shoulders of the unqualified person Caspian had publicly elevated over me. Seraphina signed off on the documents, oblivious to the fact that she had just authenticated her own professional doom. The trap was now fully primed, and the fuse was lit. I walked out of the corporate offices of Viridian Dynamics for the last time on a cold, gray Friday afternoon, the glass doors hissing shut behind me with a sound of profound finality. The air outside felt suddenly cool, fresh, and expansive, full of a thrilling, terrifying possibility. I was free. I checked my phone as I hailed a cab, and it vibrated immediately with a text. It was not from an old friend or a family member, but from Liam, the junior analyst I had always quietly looked out for and mentored. The message was a tiny, perfect piece of dramatic irony. Information I knew, but that confirmed my plan was advancing perfectly on schedule. Kronos' final review meeting scheduled for next week. Seraphina is presenting. She's using the standard template. She seems really nervous. This standard template, that single phrase confirmed the deadly omission of the bespoke security protocol. It meant she was walking into the most critical meeting of her career with a proposal guaranteed to enrage and repel the paranoid CEO. I instantly deleted the message, ensuring no trace of the communication remained. The clock on Caspian's $2 million mistake had officially started its loud, relentless ticking. The following week, I was fully immersed in my dynamic new role at Pandora Tech. The energy was infectious, the team competent, the air sharp with genuine innovation, a stark, refreshing contrast to the toxic stagnation of my former office. I was deep in my first major strategy session, feeling the power of my new position, when the proprietary financial news alerts began to flash violently red on my secondary monitor. The headlines were chillingly uniform across every financial wire, a broadcast of institutional disaster. Kronos Inc. terminates $2 million deal with Viridian Dynamics, cites critical data security lapse. The $2 million mistake had not only occurred, but it was being publicly and definitively broadcast as a critical lapse. The single worst kind of terminology for any tech company reliant on client trust. The calculated shockwave of financial disaster had hit its precise target. I did not flinch, I did not cheer, and I did not change my expression as I maintained eye contact with my new team. But inside, a single, cold, victorious smile touched my soul. I had delivered the required outcome with surgical, professional precision, and the market was now confirming the death of my former employer's quarter. It took him 2 days to locate my new private line. My new desk phone, a secure circuit I barely used, lit up with a blocked number, the unmistakable sign of a desperate, scrambling executive avoiding accountability. I let it ring twice, enjoying the sound of his inevitable panic, before finally answering. Amelia, I need to know what you did. This is corporate espionage. Caspian's voice was a frantic, high-pitched shriek, unrecognizable from the man who had dismissed me with such cold arrogance. He launched immediately into a torrent of accusation, blaming me for sabotage, demanding to know what crucial, non-contractual detail I had maliciously omitted from the handover. His hysteria was a beautiful, chaotic melody of utter failure. He was so singularly focused on the idea of my active crime that he was blind to the vast, obvious whole of his own organizational negligence and hubris. I let him rage for a minute, savoring the sound of his carefully constructed world collapsing around his ears, knowing that he had already tried to pin the blame on Seraphina and failed. I cut off his frantic tirade with a calm, disarming professionalism that felt like a surgical knife twisting in the wound. I was not defensive. I was merely detailing professional procedure. Caspian, I assure you, I followed standard corporate protocol precisely. Any failure to secure the contract at this stage is now entirely Seraphina's professional responsibility as head of sales. I paused, letting the silence accuse him. Tell me, did Seraphina, the visionary you promoted, fail to implement the Argus data protocol? I asked, my voice laced with calculated, devastating innocence. Mr. Harrington is famously paranoid about that bespoke security layer. I always handled it personally as a value add for him. It was a detail only I had access to from a private note 2 years ago. I suppose some details, the unglamorous, technical ones, are simply too minor for a modern visionary to notice. I calmly reiterated that my action was one of perfect omission, not commission. I had simply leveraged my own superior, specialized, unique knowledge. The line went silent as the weight of his own terrible decision, that he had fired the only person in the company with the knowledge to close the most important deal, crushed him. I hung up the phone without another word. Less than an hour after Caspian's desperate, failed attempt to extract a confession, another blocked number appeared on my screen. I answered, bracing myself for a second wave of hysterical executive blaming. Instead, I heard a sound that instantly disarmed me. Raw, desperate sobbing. It was Seraphina. Her distress was genuine, unrestrained, and utterly unexpected. My entire prepared script, the one where I expected her to follow Caspian's lead and accuse me of professional sabotage, shattered instantly. She wasn't calling to accuse me of anything. Her voice was thick with tears that quickly coalesced into pure, agonizing rage. He's destroying me, Amelia. He's telling the entire board I'm solely responsible, calling me a disastrous, incompetent hire. He said my vision was flawed. She wept, the words barely intelligible. The narrative had twisted again, violently. I knew she was unqualified, but her true, devastating distress was authentic, opening a sudden window to a far darker, more personal truth about Caspian that I had never considered. Seraphina, professionally broken and with nothing left to lose, revealed the awful, complete truth of her tenure. Caspian had been using the promise of the head of sales role as explicit, manipulative leverage since the very first week she arrived. The promotion was not a merit-based reward for her. It was a cynical, cruel ultimatum. He had been harassing me, Amelia, constantly. He told me if I played along, accepted the promotion, and played the role of his star, he would protect my reputation and secure my future. If I refused him, he said he'd immediately blacklist me, spreading rumors that I was emotionally unstable and couldn't handle even basic pressure. I was trapped between two impossible choices. She confessed, the story tumbling out in painful, exhausting detail. The true, ugly horror of Caspian's character became sickeningly clear. He wasn't just an incompetent, arrogant boss who played political games. He was a predator whose abuse of power had created a toxic environment for everyone beneath him. I realized with a sudden, chilling clarity that we were never antagonists. We were both the calculated victims of his twisted, boundless ego and professional rot. The professional betrayal I had suffered was merely a visible, dramatic symptom of his far deeper, moral decay. In a final, profound act of desperate trust, Seraphina offered me the ultimate, decisive weapon, a secret audio recording. She had had the foresight to capture a conversation where Caspian explicitly linked her promotion to her need for personal loyalty to him, a clear quid pro quo exchange that tied his sexual harassment directly to the disastrous, purely business decision to promote her. The value of this evidence was incalculable. It was no longer just a mere record of private harassment. It was the documented, definitive proof that Caspian's corruption, his personal moral and ethical failure, was the direct, causal, and provable factor in the colossal $2 million Kronos loss. My planned revenge, a clinical act of professional retribution, suddenly gained a soaring, undeniable justice arc. I realized my calculated, surgical strike had opened the door for a total corporate reckoning, one that would not only avenge my career but liberate Seraphina and expose the true, toxic nature of his entire leadership style to the world. With Seraphina's tearful, full consent, I meticulously prepared the final, decisive package. I transferred the audio recording and digitally attached my obsessively compiled ledger of incompetence. The recipients were the two most powerful and untouchable figures at Viridian, the highly conservative board of directors and the paranoid general counsel for HR. My attached summary was concise, professionally damning, and factually irrefutable. It drew a clean, direct, and provable line from Caspian's unprofessional favoritism and harassment, proven by the tape, to the resulting gross incompetence of his unqualified hire, proven by my ledger, and the catastrophic $2 million Kronos failure. The narrative was clean, lethal, and devastating. A predator's personal failings and ethical rot had directly, undeniably cost the company $2 million and publicly tarnished its market reputation. The truth, delivered anonymously from my new, secure location, was now an institutional scandal impossible for the Viridian leadership to ignore, delay, or cover up. The fallout was neither slow nor contained. It was an instantaneous, public spectacle of institutional failure. The board of directors, presented with irrefutable audio proof of sexual harassment and a documented, public $2 million financial catastrophe directly resulting from it, was forced to move instantly to mitigate the colossal legal and financial damage. Caspian was fired immediately for gross misconduct and professional sexual harassment. The internal story, far too explosive and damaging to contain, was instantly leaked to the business press. He became an overnight, front-page cautionary tale, painted as both a brazen predator and a fiscally incompetent leader whose ethical rot had destroyed a key financial lifeline. Viridian stock plummeted immediately, a tangible, painful financial manifestation of the justice he had provoked. I watched the financial ticker from my new, high-rise office at Pandora, realizing the destruction I had unleashed was not merely career-ending for one man, but a total, permanent restructuring of the toxic power dynamics I had quietly left behind. 6 months later, my life was a complete rewrite, a story of power rebuilt on integrity and professional merit. I was now a thriving director at Pandora Tech, building a department founded on the exact principles of meritocracy I had always believed in. I used my new position and professional credibility to quietly recruit the best of my old team, the ones who knew how to truly grind out numbers and deliver results. In a final, profound act of shared vindication and mutual respect, I hired a visibly redeemed and highly skilled Seraphina, who is now excelling, free from the shadow of threat and perverse expectation. She was a different, powerful woman, now an ally. As I was closing my laptop one afternoon, preparing to leave my actual, spacious corner office, a headhunter called, offering me a highly senior position at a trouble company called Viridian Dynamics, one attempting a massive internal overhaul. I paused, looking out at the sun-drenched skyline, a genuine, powerful smile touching my lips. "No, thank you," I said, my voice strong, final, and absolute. I've already closed that chapter and ensured the final audit was complete. Justice wasn't just a sweet, fleeting moment of revenge. It was a robust, undeniable foundation upon which I had built a new dynasty, finally and completely in control of my own powerful, professional story.